Hi, brothers and sisters. Back for part 5 of Unlocking the Mysteries of the Bible with the Key of David. Now, I didn't make a note, so I really don't know where I ended on part 4, because for me it's been several days at least. I can't remember. And it does take me a while to get through, and I'm going to recap. I can't help it. It's all part and parcel of the same package. So I apologize if you get bored of hearing the same detail rehashed in a different part. I've really kind of lost track of how many points I've made, obviously, for anybody who's been following me. And I am using a new camera here on a new computer while I got my old one in front of me. And I gotta tell you, it's making my eyes a lot bluer than what they really are. It's direct light shining into my eyes. They're usually not this blue. Not that anybody cares, but anyway. So I guess, technically, I'm going to start at part 57. And, see, I have to operate so weird because I don't like my desk, the structure of my desk. It's a roll top, so it makes it very difficult to do anything on it. But 57, we're going to look at seeing with the 7 eyes of God and how the Key of David kind of breaks that down for us. So the 7 eyes, it links us to Zechariah 4, is where we're going to find the 7 eyes of God. And it's going to link us to that Greek word, again, Edu, which is 1492. And it says this, seeing that becomes knowing, this is the Greek word Edu, seeing that becomes knowing and then is a gateway to grasp spiritual truth, that's reality, from a physical plane. Edu then is a physical seeing, sight, which should be the constant bridge to mental and spiritual seeing or comprehension, they have in brackets. So the 7 eyes is very important, and we looked at it in a different way, and we discovered this part of the brain in the occipital lobe. It's a part called the atlas, and it's shaped like a triangle, sort of like a triangle. And they say that's where I see things. I go to get them, and they're not there. These white things that's flying around in the air, and I look for them, and I can't find them anywhere. I don't know what they are. I don't know if they're so small that only a certain light can pick them up. I don't know. Anyway, but what we realized is there's a part at the back of the brain, shaped sort of like a triangle, where it sort of is responsible for how we put together what we see. So in a sense, it's linking you to the 7 eyes of God. And in the video where we did it, and they're flying everywhere right now. I don't even know what they are. But in the video that I did, seeing with the 7 eyes of God, you know, I said it's proof positive that we're supposed to use our physical eyes with our own sense and reasoning, our comprehension of what we're seeing going on around us in order to bridge this physical existence of ours to the spiritual one. And when I was doing the video, it was to bring in the pineal gland. And what it looks like that they were doing, they were encouraging you to go strongly to visions as opposed to paying attention to the literal or what you're seeing right before your eyes, which is literal. But don't take it literal. Don't take the physical existence literal. But whatever you do, take what we write in the Bible literal, right? So that is to say that the visions that you see with your pineal gland is more important than what you bear witness to with your actual physical eyes in this existence, such as woman being your life giver. No. No, you don't take that literal. You take what we wrote in the Bible, that male, God, is your creator and life giver. That's what you take literal. So you see how they're really kind of in opposition to each other, and the Bible bears testimony to that. In one of the passages that we single out where God Mother speaks of the burden of the Lord and the Baal religion that began to be taught through the men of Israel. Okay, so that's where this is leading us to. So seeing with the 7 eyes of God. So Zechariah 4:10 says this. It says, "For who has despised the day of small things," right? "For they shall rejoice and shall see the plummet." So what's the plummet to do with? The building. The building of what? Well, the building of the woman's palace that you see in Song of Songs, chapter 8, where Zerubbabel also says here, and I'm favoring teeth, that's why I'm speaking funny. Zechariah 4, "I have began the building of this temple, and I will finish it." And Zerubbabel means foreigner in Babylon, and it's a reference to the spirit of Israel that becomes rebirthed at the end of days in this physical existence. She's speaking a different spirit, right? Which is the original spirit of her covenant come back into existence, which is the new branch, and we're going to look at that a little bit deeper. So the 7 eyes, "For they shall rejoice and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel, the foreigner in Babylon, with those 7 eyes. They are the eyes of the Lord, which run to and fro throughout the whole earth." Look at that. So what we see in the eyes, and we're going to look at deep allegory again, is Israel is called the pupil of God's eye in Psalm 17. So let's go to Psalm 17. Okay, verse 8. What does it say? "Keep me as the apple of the eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings." That's the spirit of Israel from the beginning. That's actually speaking of the one that she's cut from, though she's cut without hands, because she's cut from her mother, who is from above. So you don't see who cuts her out, because it's her mother from above. And the spirit of that covenant, which man agreed to, gave his hand in marriage, said, "Yeah, we agree to this covenant with your daughter Israel," and then turned on her and gnashed at her with their teeth. All right, now I did want to read through this entire chapter of Psalm 17. But to get through these ideas of the pupil of her eye being Israel and how it links to the beloved. You watch this. This is just cool. I just discovered this morning. Though, yeah, this is a recap on the key of David. She says, "Keep me as the apple of the eye. Hide me under the shadow of the wings." All right. So where does that take us? To the apple tree. Because the pupil is the apple, which she says here. She says, what did she say? "Keep me as the apple of the eye." The pupil. Let me be the one that will always speak your covenant, the spirit of your covenant. And that's a promise that she makes to her. "My glory will not go to another, it will go to Israel." So she's talking about her spirit will go on her daughter Israel, which was promised in the beginning. She was gave in covenant. She came down from above, is what we see in our understanding. So where does this take us to? The apple tree? Can anybody think of where it might take us to? Song of Songs, doesn't it? Watch what it says here. Song of Songs 8:5. Watch this. This is so cool. I get so happy when I find all the connections. It's just a delight to me. Song 8:5. "Who is this coming up from the wilderness?" Now remember, wilderness is another allegory to the desert, but it's also allegorical to Babylon, and we'll show you that in a minute. So who is this coming up from the wilderness leaning on her beloved? "She, under the apple tree, I woke you up there. I roused you up. I woke you up," is what it states. "There, your mother," who's the mother of us all? Israel from above. "Your mother conceived you, gave birth to you." Watch where she does that. "There, she who was in labor gave you birth, gave life to you." So she who's cut out without hands, which is Israel, mother's firstborn Ephraim, the daughter. This is what we're looking at. But we'll just look at a quick other rendering, if I don't get interrupted. "Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? I raised thee up under the apple tree. There thy mother brought thee forth. There she brought thee forth that bare thee." So the one who gave life. But he says, I awakened you. Let's do the English Standard Version. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Under the apple tree, I awakened you. So, who gets awakened in the Old Testament? Who is that Lord that suddenly awakens and she is angered by the idols, and the idols there is male, that she sees upon the earth? Well, the Lord there in every passage is 136. And she awakes as a Lord on strong, that's been on from strong drink. She awakes as one who's been drunk on wine. Now, where else does this idea of awake lead us to? Again, it leads us to a passage in Song of Songs, chapter 5, doesn't it? I hope my audio is picking up. I tested it, but I don't know. What does he say? What does she say? She says this first in Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 2. I sleep, but my heart is awake. A sound. Oh, she hears a sound. My beloved is knocking. You see, he's waking her up there. This is where he reaches his hand in to her, right? Through the gate. He doesn't open the gate. That's a bit curious too. He doesn't open the gate. Why? Because she's the one that has to open it. And so he says here, she says, my beloved is knocking. And then he says, open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. My head is drenched with dew, my hair with the dampness of night. She says, I have taken off my robe. Must I put it back on? I have washed my feet. Must I soil them again? My beloved put his hand to the latch. My heart pounded for him. So she's definitely in love with him, right? Now, if we pull the whole chapter up, and I don't know that I should get into the whole chapter here just yet. This is where we see her fingers drip with myrrh. We know she's the one that must ascend to the holy hill of God, her mother, right? Who shall ascend to my holy hill? She with clean hands and pure heart. So what we're actually looking at, and I speculated this on the last video, was the Ancient of Days, is what I'm looking at. And I think I wrote some extra down here. But we have more to get into here with the beloved and the awakening and all the other riddles that we're able to break down when we discover the key of David is the daughter of Zion that was rejected. So, okay, where am I? Song of Songs 8:5. She's the branch out of the dust, or from the root, right? Where her mother births her under the apple tree. She's the new branch, and she's springing off of that apple tree, who is the original Israel, which then takes you to Romans 11, right? It says, what has Israel not obtained? That which she seeketh for. What did she seek for? Well, she sought for her children. And we know it says more of the children of the desolate than of she who has a husband. Well, she who has a husband was the harlot spirit. And this was the righteous spirit rejected. They didn't want the spirit of her covenant or the laws of her covenant. And you see the kings taking counsel against her to bring her down, to gnash upon her, and to falsely accuse her, to take her covenant out of the land is what the whole idea is. And she's identified as the key of David, and the other one that they took and brought in covenant with is identified as a harlot Babylon, also identified as the key of Solomon. And Solomon figured prominently in the tearing down of the daughter of Zion, the key of David. And we'll probably recap that at the very end. We'll go through every thing to do with what he did, which probably should have been the first thing I did, but oh well. We'll end it the way we began it. Okay, so who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? I awoke thee up under the apple tree, and there thy mother conceived thee. There she who was in labor gave you birth. So who's the one who gave her birth? Gave birth to her? That's actually the Revelation 12 sign. She's giving birth to her firstborn, once again. Ephraim, the firstborn of her womb, who she promises full restoration back. But you find her giving birth to her in Micah 4:10. All right? We discovered all of these things. What does it say in Micah 4:10? Be in pain and labor to bring forth, O daughter of Zion. That's the picture of Revelation 12. That's what we're picturing. Like a woman in travail, for now shalt thou go forth out of the city, and thou shalt dwell in the field, and thou shalt go even to Babylon. That's the wilderness, Babylon. All right? There shalt thou be delivered, and there the Lord shall redeem thee from the hand of thine enemies. All right. So what do the nations say to Israel? It says, now also many nations are gathered against thee that say, let her be defiled, and let her eyes look upon Zion. So their intentions were made clear to bring her down. They did not want her in covenant. They wanted the harlot, wherein the harlot comes under man and teaches his man-made religious lies and laws as him as God. And yet all of this indicates that she was the pupil that she brought forth to teach her truth, the spirit of her covenant to, and that she is also identified as the firstborn. She says, there she gave birth to thee. And then in Song of Songs 6:9, it says she is the pure one of her mother, right? Undefiled. Her fingers drip with myrrh. Okay, so that should take us back to Song of Songs. But all of this, the branch, the pupil of her eye, Micah 4:10, Revelations 12 takes us to. And into Romans 11, did I pull Romans 11 up? I didn't pull Romans 11 up, so just give me a second here. Romans 11, we've discussed this on many of our videos. It speaks of the first fruits. And it says, if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, right? What shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? So this takes us back, this whole chapter actually, when we got looking at it, it brought in Baal. It brought in those who hadn't bowed a knee to man as God. So then we keep going down here. And then it says in verse 7, they try to make Israel male, masculine. No, it's she. She says, I must restore that which I took not away. So she was the righteous spirit rejected. She didn't take them away. It was the harlot spirit that took them away. But she says, I must restore what I didn't take away. So I have to obtain my children once again. And I have to do it through the truth of Mother God's covenant from above, who is the mother of us all, and who I'm cut from as a remnant daughter of Israel, reborn out of the dust of the earth. Is what we're coming to conclude. And I already spoke in video 3 where you find the remnant daughters of Israel, okay? I already put that in there. So what does it say? In verse 7, Romans 11, it says, what then? Has Israel not obtained that what he seeketh for? No, she seeketh for. Look the word obtained up. It's going to take you to the birthing process. I think it's 2 words removed or 1 word removed from that word obtained. It takes you to the birthing of the children. What? Has Israel not obtained that which she seeketh for? But the election has obtained it, and the rest were blinded. So the election here, I believe it was this word, that when you go in and look up, it has the idea of a divine selection. They're divinely appointed by God. Because God Mother has never lost sight of her lineage, her daughters, her remnant daughters, this line that they follow through. And then at the end is rebirthed out of the dust of the earth. And she promised us, she says, don't worry, you are my chosen in the beginning, you will be my chosen in the end. I have not forgotten about you. You are the firstborn of my womb, and I will restore back what was taken away from you. And so again, we're going to get to the Ancient of Days coming back into our view. And actually what she tells her about herself in her verdict that's gave. And again, we looked at this, I believe, in video 4, is where we looked extensively at the Ancient of Days. And that she who is brought, the woman, the daughter of her mother, who is brought, or the daughter of woman who is brought into the Ancient of Days, who's technically the mother of us all. That's who she's being brought into. And so, where was I? So what? Has she not obtained that which she seeketh for? But the election has obtained it. The divine selection of the 144,000 first fruits. How do we know that? Well, if we keep reading, we'll stumble on that this is actually what's in view. So, according as it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber. Torpor. A deep sleep came upon their spirit, that allowed man to rule over womankind and teach them this man-made lie and law that yokes her and that puts in her head that he actually has a right to do it because God said so. That's the spirit of sleep that comes upon them. And that's why he calls to her and awakens her out of sleep, Song of Songs. And then in the Old Testament, the Lord that awakens is 136, daughter Zion. We identified her number. And she awakens very indignant, very angry by the false image that she sees as man, 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 is God, 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 and what gave life to everything. And she's very upset by what she sees. We did a video on that Lord that awakens. And we know that's who he's waking up here. He calls out to her, and he puts his hand in through the gates, and he lets her know that he's there. And he wakes her up. And but it is the mother that birthed her, all right? And that means she come from Mother Israel, who is the mother of us all, Mother Jerusalem from above, who is the mother of us all. And so she puts them to sleep in the spirit, all right? There is a passage that alludes, she says, why would I let you suffer all these horrible things? I'll put the spirit to sleep so that you won't have to bear witness to the horrible things that's going to happen. And then at the end she wakes her up, to which she's very angered by what she sees. Eyes that should not see and ears that they should not hear unto this day. So at the writing of this passage. Verse 9, and David said, let their table be made a snare and a trap and a stumbling and a recompense unto them. We see that snare, as he had mixture of doctrine, that wisdom has set on her table. She says, I've been forced to mingle my wine. That's in Proverbs 9. And really what you understand, she's saying, I've been forced to mingle my word, is what she's saying. And the word is identified as the living water that flowed from Lebanon, the house in the forest of Lebanon that would give life to you. And that'll probably be in video 5. What is this, video 5? Probably video 6. I hope to be my wrap-up video, where we'll talk a little bit on the house in the forest of Lebanon and how it all went down with King Solomon and the key of David and the key of Solomon and the harlot being built up and all that stuff. And which we've touched on off and on. All right, so we went through all that. Okay, so it's a snare unto them. You find that in Proverbs 9. She has set her table. She has hewn out her own 7 pillars, and she has sent forth her maidens to the high places. So it becomes a trap to their own feet. That he, false doctrine, the blood that gets dumped in her word, that gets dripped and poured into her word, which then becomes allegorical to the Red Sea, that the spirit of Moses has to part in order to deliver her children through. All right? So let their eyes be darkened that they may not see, and bow down their back. All right? Forever. And bend their backs forever? I don't think so. She says in Isaiah 59, she says, yet are you the spirit of my covenant. And she's talking to Israel, who became the byword, right? So let me pull this up so I can get that going for you, that verse. No, I did it again. It's Isaiah 52, isn't it? But she says, as for me, this is my covenant with them, saith the Lord, my spirit that is upon thee. So she's talking to Israel, because it was Israel, the daughters of Israel, that her spirit was upon, to teach the nation and the children, right, the truth of her law, which was a law of peace, truth, equity, love. They favored nobody. They made judgments fair. They were fair in their judgments and in their treatments. They didn't put one over the other. My spirit that is upon thee, and my words which I have put in thy mouth shall not depart out of thy mouth, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, nor out of the mouth of thy seed's seed, saith the Lord, from henceforth and forever. Now, when we go to chapter 52, I believe it's 52, the very end verse, which links us back to Romans here. So it says, no, it's 51. It's 51. So 51 is where we find it. I hope you can hear me. Verse 23, but I will put it into the hand of them that afflict thee. They are afflicting Israel. That means the daughters. And their sons, their children, their sons and their daughters, but their sons that they were raising up under their truth. All right? But I will put it into the hand of them that afflict thee, which have said to thy soul, bow down, that we may go over, and thou hast laid thy body as the ground and as the street to them that went over. So you see that in correlation to what it's saying in Romans 11. It says, let their eyes be darkened that they may not see, and bow down their backs, bend their backs continually. So what does it say? I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? She's referring to the daughters of Israel. Where we proved that what was going on was the splitting of the covenant into two. One that would be a harlot, play his harlot, and bow to his religious lies and laws. And we'll see that again in allegory to Esther. We're going to look at that in a minute. And then one that became the outcast that no man sought a covenant for. And they delighted when they thought they had finally taken the spirit of a covenant out of the land. Which were these laws of peace. They did not impute violence. They did not impute unfair treatment based on gender. And so I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles. Because when they fell, and the men of Israel began to exalt the harlot spirit, where you see Balaam tell Balak, go get your women, send them into the men of Israel, seduce the men of Israel, teach them this lie. It tastes like honey on their tongue. It's cobra's venom in their stomach, which is allegorical to the serpents, to these women that were coming in from the surrounding Adamic nations that already knew the religious lie. It had been taught to them. And then they were attacking the woman seed of Israel, the daughters themselves, by contaminating and coming in and seducing the men. And the men were already warned, you are not to take wives from the surrounding Adamic nations, to which then you get that passage in Isaiah 6, because the sons of Zion were called the sons of God upon this earth, and they took wives, all of whom they chose. That's what that means. And you see them murdering them in Lamentations chapter 4. The mothers of Israel, they were murdering on the corners, it says, of the streets. That's an allegory to the altar. Then you see in verse 3 of Lamentations that the daughters of Zion were playing the harlot. Well, they were playing the harlot because they came under his teaching then after that. That's what that means. The young ones that were left in the land were no longer able to be taught by the wise women whom they had either cast out of the land or murdered. That's what they did. And they were called the holy ones, which is akin to the high priest's breastplate that the stones were on. And these sons of God, known as the gold that encrusted them and was to hold them up and exalt them, began to murder them. And you see that fall in the statue, that male image of a king as your God, from gold straight down to gold, straight down to clay on the toes. And then you see the stone cut out without hands, allegorical to these daughters coming back into existence as the remnant daughters of Israel. This divine selection in Romans 11, smashing the toes, which are clay. And then they in Zechariah 4 become the capstone. They are also allegorical to the seven eyes that are seeing the truth, the spirit. So we see this all here. I'm losing track because, okay, Romans 11. Right. So how much more their fullness? Okay, to provoke them to jealousy. that they should fall, God forbid, but rather through their fall salvation is come into the Gentiles for to provoke them to jealousy. So they get cast out into the lands of the Gentiles, is what they do. Because God threatened them, she said, if you don't want my scepter to rule by, which is the daughters of Zion, then you won't have them in covenant. I'll cast them out into the lands of the Gentiles. And there you see her as the Azazel goat, and yes, it's a female goat. As the Azazel goat, the one cast out into the wilderness, that had to bear the sins, the double fold, for what was going on in Israel, for they were cast down, so they had to bear the burden of what the men were exalting, which was the harlot spirit, to which her house, her children, gets handed over. And it says truth staggered in the streets, and equity could not enter in. Fairness, truth, all those things could not enter into it. And so God threatens them, fine, you men of Israel, you want to cast your sisters down for the harlot spirit so you can teach your own laws in your own religious way and make yourself a god in the world. Fine, you won't have her. I'll cast her out into the Gentile nations. And there you see the fulfilling of that promise by her mother from above in Isaiah 49, where she says, Ephraim, they may have forgotten about you. It says the son of her womb, the firstborn. No, Ephraim was the daughter, the firstborn of her womb. She says, oh, they may have forgotten about you. I didn't forget about you. She says, you'll not only be a light unto the Israelites, as the Israelites yourself, but you'll be a light unto the Gentile nations. And that's why you see them cast out. But as the Azazel goat, you see her cast out into the wilderness. And in a sense, it's wilderness because they have no spirit. They don't have the righteous spirit there. So it becomes her wilderness to actually shape, in a sense. And so the Gentiles over time, she's the one that actually is producing them. That's because it was the woman's seed where you claim to be an Israelite from. So where did the 10 northern tribes go? They went out into the Gentile nations. They got cast out as that scepter, as the Azazel goat. And it says in Isaiah 40, it says, tell Israel that her sins have now been forgiven her because she has borne double for her sins as the Azazel goat. That's why you see a she-goat in the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 15:9. It's representing these daughters of Zion that the men of Israel cast out, did not want them in covenant to write their laws, which were gave directly by Mother God from above, called wisdom. And there was no violence, her waters were pure, and they flowed from Lebanon, from the house in the forest of Lebanon, where the government of God met. That's what you're seeing. And then they would pass through the gates of David as the key of David. All right. So how much more their fullness? All right. Now, if the fall of them be the richest of the world, and the diminishing of them, the richest of the Gentile, how much more their fullness? So when they come back into existence again, these daughters who were gnashed upon, hated. All right. They did not want them in covenant. She's actually saw as the cornerstone rejected before the foundation of the world. That's why you see wisdom honing out her own 7 pillars. Well, she did anyway. And we're told that those foxes, which is another word for a burrower, dug out the truth of the true foundation and packed in the lies, is your allegory. And that's why you see in Song of Song them speaking to the Shulamite who's representing Israel. And she has a flock of she-goats that she's shepherding, and they're later identified as the daughters of Zion, who are then identified as the lilies of the covenant that David speaks of in his Psalms. And you see her as the lily of the valley. I am the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valley. That's Israel, daughter Israel. Saw as the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world because they did not want her in covenant. The man didn't. And so it says, what? Tell Israel her warfare has ended, that she has received double for her sins. So man didn't wash her with blood. Blood don't wash you. Blood don't wash you. Water washes you clean. The word of God, the law of heaven, washes you clean. And so, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. Verse 15. This is where you get it. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, so we see why they were cast off. the promise of the Gentile nations would also become hers. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? So who brings life to the dead? Israel is identified as the light that will rebirth her children through her truth and is shown as the light of the world. In Isaiah 49, that's where you see her as the light. And it's all there in allegory. It is her that will deliver the children of the world. We'll look at that too if I get a chance. How long is this? Okay. So if the casting away of them be, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? Verse 16, this tells you it's the first fruits, that double camp of Mahanaim that is shepherded by the Shulamite. One camp, we're told, is 72,000. Christ himself tells us that, who is Joshua. He is her beloved. All right, because the first Adam didn't want her. He loved her because he, too, was cut from mother. So he loved his beloved. He exalts her. He's gold. He's golden. He exalts these holy ones. This holy one, he exalted her, the Holy One of Israel, the daughter of Zion, in her law. And he walked it. He's shown walking it. He doesn't walk the Torah. The Torah, the Pharisees hated him because he wouldn't walk their man-made religious law, and so they crucified him under the Roman law, which also is just a partake of the Torah law, which had fed out from Mount Zion, really, to the four corners of the world, and then shapes the religious lie and the false foundation that our government laws and system is founded on, and thereupon he is seen yoking his sister under his lies and laws. And the reason why she permits that to be so is because she believes it comes from God. And when they finally wake up, then they realize this is a friggin' lie from men to put me under him and make me play his harlot. And he loves it. And then blames me for the whole thing. What a nice, neat little package that they've come up with, isn't it? So where am I? For if the first fruits be holy, the lump. Now, if you go back to Romans 11, the lump is identified as the body. It'll tell you it's the body. So if the first fruits be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, which is Israel in the very beginning holding no guile, so she's not found to be unholy. She was holy because the branches that are coming from this root are holy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be. And the branches are identified as the daughters of Zion, the 144,000, holding no guile on their tongue, because they're speaking the truth that they received from their mother. That's what they're doing. As the one cut out without hands, as the Holy Spirit reborn upon this world. To bring them back into covenant with the Holy Spirit. So, for if the first fruits be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. So you're looking at the daughters of Zion there. Now, let me see where else I got to go. All right, so Jeremiah 23. Now, we knew when Balaam told Balak to go get the women of those Adamic nations and to send them in and to seduce the men of Israel, that we knew it was all about the contamination of the woman's seed, which they call a plague or a curse upon Israel. Now, in Jeremiah 23, this is further going to link us to the 7 eyes, all right, and to the curse and to what they came to worship in Israel, which was Baal. That's what you're going to look at. That's what we're going to look at right quick. So what does it say in Jeremiah 23, verse 10? All right. This is what it says. It says, the land is full of adulterers, men, because of the curse. What curse? The plague on the woman's seed out in the desert, where the women from the surrounding Adamic nations identified as the vipers that were coming in and biting the men. And yes, they were targeting the men intentionally. The men wanted the men targeted by these women who knew their truth versus the daughters of Zion who held God's truth in their mouth, no guile. And so they sent the women in as these vipers, serpents that could poison with a lie. But it tickled the men's ears. It was like honey on their tongue, but it was cobra's venom in their stomach. There was no living water that would flow from these men. And but what was Moses instructed to do? He was told to make a brass serpent and to place it on a pole. And on the scepter, it's representing the daughters of Zion, whom man rejected in covenant, didn't want a covenant with them. And so they were representing the glory raised up. And if those men that had been poisoned by those women that Balak went and got from his Adamic nations, and Balaam told him to do it when he couldn't curse the nation of Israel, the daughters, and sent them in and seduced the men, it becomes the curse. All right? And we know this to be true because Phinehas grabs a spear when one of the men of Israel brings in a Midianitish woman, which was from one of these Adamic nations. And it says he strikes them both through, but it specifies the woman's belly. And it was a woman's belly because it was all about contaminating her seed and making a woman in all nations everywhere that would bow to a man as God. That's what you see. And if these men really wanted eternal life, they had to look at what they had already been given covenant, which was the daughters of Zion, raised as a serpent. Serpent means a wise woman. Now, it can be allegorical to a wicked wise woman or to a very wise, godly wise woman. And that's why we speculated in Lamentations 4 that it was the mothers that the sons of God were murdering, the sons of Zion were murdering, because they actually wanted to take the daughters and teach them the women's way that they had brought in and married. And in order for them to do that, they had to take the wise women who knew the covenant of God out of the land. And they delighted when they thought they had finally did that. And that came in a multitude of ways. They got cast out, it states. God warns them in Micah 2, this is not your rest, leave. She warns them right then and there, leave. They don't want you. Leave. And that's why I speculated that there had to be more than one group of Israelites. When these women actually determined to leave, they left as a group that the men did not want in covenant. And they were warned to do so. So, all right. Now, I'm in Jeremiah. Okay, so the land is full of adulterers. That's male. Because of the curse, the harlot daughters that come in unto them, and they took as many wives as they wanted and just loved it. The land, which was representing the pleasant land of the daughter of Zion, lies parched. It become a wilderness, become a desert as well, right? So that's why Zion, you link that word to desert. Zion is actually linked to a desert because they also dry up her waters, her living waters. And we're told you were to get your waters from your own wife in Proverbs 5. And then she's also shown in Song of Songs 4, 12 to 15 as a fountain of water, a spring shut up. And they did, they shut her up. They struck the judge on the cheek. We're told that in Micah 5:1. And that was more or less to shut her up. And so all of it's allegorical because the curse of the land lies parched, and the pastures in the wilderness are withered. The prophets follow an evil course and use their power unjustly. For both prophet and priest are ungodly. Even in my house I have found their wickedness, declares the Lord. Okay. So we see the curse there in Jeremiah 23. And we brought in Mother, who was speaking to the men who were, they were actually prophesying in the name of Baal. And she says, you taught Israel to prophesy through male. That's what you taught. And we find that in, I got Jeremiah. I thought I had Jeremiah pulled up twice. So what does she say here? I have heard what the prophets said that prophesy lies in my name, saying, I have dreamed. I have dreamed. How long shall this be in the heart of the prophets that prophesy lies? Yea, they are prophets of deceit of their own heart. So this was the religious lie that those vipers, harlots from the surrounding Adamic nations on behalf of Balak and all the men who wanted it this way, sent into the men, and they took it with them. And it says that which think to cause my people to forget my name by their dreams, which they tell every man to his neighbor, as their fathers have forgotten my name for Baal. Their mothers forgot their name for Baal. That's what the mothers forgot. The name for Baal was husband who wanted to be Lord and Master and God. So the prophet, this is where you get the understanding of what you see, in a sense, with the 7 eyes of God, from a physical perspective, which then leads you to the spiritual perspective, versus your dreams and visions. This is what God says here in Jeremiah 23, verse 28. The prophet who has only a dream should recount the dream. Fine. But the one who has my word should speak my word faithfully, truthfully. For what is straw, a vision, compared to the grain, compared to something that is full of life? This is the Lord's declaration. So, to what she says is not my word like fire. This is the Lord's declaration. And like a hammer that pulverizes the rock. So, she's speaking of her word as a hammer here. That's going to break out the false foundation and going to have to do it almost, in a sense, piece by piece. Okay. So we see all of that. Now, what I'm going to run through right quick here, because my video is already getting long, is Israel played the harlot, is what it says. Now, you do so see this in allegory with Esther. And we said that when the men went after the wise women, it was so that they could take the young women under their wing, in a sense. Although men don't possess the wings, it's actually the woman representing the spirit that is showed as being the winged, as the wings that can go ascend, right? Which again, we didn't take into the Shulamite. I spoke on other videos where it says she with clean hands and a pure heart can ascend to my holy hill. Well, that's the Ancient of Days. She has to open her gate with the truth, but the verdict is gave there. And I'm going to show you the verdict that she gives in a minute, because I'm going to wrap this up. Okay, so Esther links us to the myrtle tree because her name means myrtle, or Hadassah, which is the one time that myrtle is gave. Which is interesting because it shows us those myrtle trees as your horsemen, actual horsewomen, standing in the valley. And the valley represents the low places of the earth. And they also are representing the 7 eyes that go forth in the spirit. And it looks like it's something to do with the night, in the darkness. So we're actually in the dark right now, in a sense. We've not been brought into the light yet. But her name means myrtle. So Vashti wouldn't bow to a drunk king, more or less, when you get understanding. Because he wanted her to come to one of the festival where the wine was flowing freely. What did they get drunk upon? Wine. An admixture of doctrine. And he wanted to show her off physically. He didn't care about her mind. He didn't care about her heart. He didn't care about her spirit. He wanted to show her off physically, her beauty. He didn't care about anything else. So when Vashti wouldn't do that, and this is all allegorical to a false doctrine, the king drunk on wine who wanted Vashti to present herself so they could drool over her and what she looked like, and she refused. She said, I'm not playing your harlot. That's what you all want me to do. You want me to come and present myself so you can drool over me. I'm more than that. I'm a queen. And when she wouldn't do that, what does he do? He gets angry. Well, I don't want you. And what gets presented to him? A young girl. A young Israelite. I'm thinking Vashti was the original Israelite. But who advises her the whole time? How to bow to the king. Mordecai does. Her brother, her father, after her parents were murdered, you see we're getting the allegory all the way around. Mordecai, whose name just happens to mean one who bows to Marduk. What was Marduk? He was the solar deity calf, or the solar calf. Oh, where do we see that? In the Exodus, where the men changed their glory, the daughters of Zion, to an ox, and then began to bow to it and sacrifice dead things to it so they could eat meat, and they could also exalt themselves as God. And Mordecai's name means one who bows to Marduk. Well, what was he instructing Esther to do? Bow to a king. Marduk, Bel. These are all derived of the same thing when you get right down to it. It goes right back to your husband who wanted to rule as Lord and Master. And she's getting advised by a man? I find that ironic. Shouldn't she have been advised by a woman? Not a man. But her father or her brother, whoever it was that was raising her, Mordecai, was her advisor. Right? Because her parents, well, her mother, who should have been teaching her, had been murdered. They had been murdered out of the land. So when Vashti won't bow, the king, of course, makes a decree that he's looking for a new queen, to which Esther is chosen, which means myrtle, by the way. So, in contrary, okay, I'll read that after. But what does the king decide to do after Vashti won't bow to him and do what he wants and play his harlot? You get that drunken doctrine, the admixture that he's drunk on. Well, first of all, we know that he had 7 wicked male advisors. And what's the decree that they all come up with? What's the decree? That every wife in the land would bow to her, what's the word there? Baal, as Lord and Master. Her husband, as Lord and Master. You don't see that carry over into the New Testament? I do. Every woman will bow to her husband. Yeah, it's still carried over. It's a lie, written by the hands of men, a wicked king who got mad because there was a woman who had a backbone who thought she deserved better treatment than what he wanted to treat her as. So, you see Baal right there. They have prophesied lies. And she says, I sent them not. They came of their own free will. I didn't send them. I send them this way. That's how I send them. So, in contrary to the fragrant evergreen myrtle leaves, and yes, though Esther's compared to her, it does state Israel did play the harlot. But you see that splitting of the pleasant land into 2 covenants, right? And so this is the split that we see going on. But at the end, she's rebirthed of the dust of the earth, speaking the spirit of her covenant, the original covenant, which we've looked at. So in contrary to the fragrant evergreen myrtle leaves, myrrh is a desert tree. So again, we're seeing Zion as the desert, had no water, right? But in this wandering also to birth her children, which she's seeking for, so the evergreen myrrh, the myrrh is a desert tree that when gets hurt produces a resin or tears with a bitter, penetrating aroma. The mar means bitter in Hebrew and is the root for the mor, the Hebrew name of myrrh. Okay, so we get the comparison of the difference between the myrtle and the myrrh. So it's actually, in a sense, symbolizing the rebirth. But Esther was actually the one playing the harlot because she had been taught by a man how to do it, how to go about doing it. And then we drew that link to Lamentations 4:1, where we saw the sons of Zion, or the sons of God, actually murdering the Holy One on the corners, which represents the altar, really, as a blood libation to their blood god. God said, I require no blood of you. I require no sacrifice of you. And then you'll get a passage in Isaiah 4:4, I will wash the blood off of my daughters of Zion. Because she says, you were the ones that were in covenant with me, and it was my words that I will birth you through the truth as the firstborns of my kingdom. And she says that in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 18, I think. So we see all that allegory. We also are told she is the light of the world in Isaiah 26. To which, do I have it pulled up? And then I'm going to finish up with the verdict that she actually sees. Okay, so I don't have it pulled up. I thought I had it pulled up. And I'm still missing a whole bunch of stuff I could throw in. I just ain't going to have the time. But Isaiah, come on. Now it's not moving. Okay, 26. What does she say? And she is identified as the light that will birth life into her children. Verse 17. Like as a woman with child. Like a woman with child. That's who Israel has been. We have been in pain. We have, as it were, brought forth wind. Wind is another word for empty doctrine. So, we have not wrought any deliverance in the earth. So she's the deliverer. Oh, look at that. She's the one that delivers the children. And she delivers them in the earth. Neither have the inhabitants of the world fallen. So they ain't brought down the lies, the false doctrine, because she's tried to deliver her children through these lies and have failed to do it. That's what this whole verse is saying to you. But you see them as the new teeth. She's gave the new teeth, I believe in Isaiah 40, as a new threshing instrument where she threshes that mountain which is identified as your he-goat rulers. Baal, who wants to be your Lord and Master and make laws that yokes you under him. And so she says the inhabitants of the world haven't fallen. 19. Thy dead men shall live together, with my dead body shall they arise. Awake and sing, ye that dwell in the dust, for thy dew, thy doctrine, is as the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead. Now they don't show you in the King James, but the word light appears here because she's the light. She's the doe of the dawn. A new day dawning because she's the light. And that light is identified as a red sun in Isaiah 54. She says, I will make your pinnacles, and the word there for pinnacles is sun of ruby. So she's saying, I'll give you a red sun. She's saying that this sun that we have is not our sun. And the Shulamite verifies that in Song of Song 1:6. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun has looked upon me. That's the false light. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyard. So that links us to the word defiled in Revelations 14:4. And that word defiled will link you to the word dark, mud, black. So she's saying, they defiled me so I would keep their vineyard with their lies. That's what she's saying. And my own vineyard have I not kept. Which is what you're seeing here in Isaiah 26:17, like as a woman with child, that draweth near the time of delivery. We have been in pain, but we have failed. We have failed. And but it says in 19, your dead will live, their corpses will rise. So that takes you to Romans 11 again. If the rejecting of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? It's these daughters of Zion that were rejected in the very beginning, and the spirit of their covenant cast down. So man could build up a harlot that would teach his religious lies and laws, which is seen as being Israel, Zion, that the men of Israel were being poisoned by when Balaam told Balak to go get his women. And then you see them joining themselves to Baal Peor, and they did things sacrificed to idol. And that idol was an ox or a bullock. And they changed their glory, which was identified as female daughters of Zion, into a beast. And then you kind of get your allegorical to the beast system that the world is founded upon, which means a violent system. And that it is woman as the harlot that'll bow to that and play that and allow it to go forth, instead of teaching the spirit of the original covenant. But she does. So it says, the corpses will rise, you who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy. For your dew is as the dew of the dawn, the new day, your doctrine. And the earth will give birth to her dead, to her departed spirit. So she's proof that she's going to resurrect the dead. She's also identified as the light of the world. She's also identified as Ephraim, the firstborn of mother's womb, in Isaiah 49. And she says, I'll spread out your tents. That's your head, your body to dwell in, right? For your children, just as I spread my own out. And that's mother speaking, which is going to link us to the verdict in that the Ancient of Days is seen arriving. And we did this on our last, so I'm not going to go through it all. But I'm going to go through the verdict that she's actually gave by the Ancient of Days, when daughter of woman, identified as Israel, with her companions and virgin daughters, which is saw as her inheritance, which is saw as the Spirit's inheritance. So the Spirit is upon these women with the Spirit of the original covenant. And so the verdict is gave. But what does it say first? We'll recap. It says, who shall ascend into my holy hill? She with clean hands and a pure heart. That's the Shulamite identified in Song of Songs. And the camp that she has is the camp of God. That's what Jacob calls it. And it's Mahanaim, a double camp, 144,000 daughters of Zion. And she is seen as the daughter of woman, and they got son of God, son of man. No, son of man would make it a son of Adam. It was her, the woman's seed, that would be the blessed. And so she is seen being brought to the Ancient of Days, the court, in the court. She opens up the books, and it says the full dominion is restored back to her. We know it's her because of Micah 4. It says, daughter Zion's dominion will be restored back to her. And this is the verdict that she actually tells her, I believe. And we find it, and I did a video on this in 2 Corinthians chapter 7. This is the verdict handed down, I believe, by the Ancient of Days. All right? So, verse 10, we'll start at verse 10, 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Godly sorrow brings repentance. So, it means, a godly sorrow means to be really seeking the truth, with true wanting to understand where we went wrong and what we did wrong. So, godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation. And leaves no regrets, no doubt in your mind. But worldly sorrow brings death. So the sorrow that they're teaching us, that fed out from Babylon, and becomes the false foundation for our world government system, our religious system that teaches a man as God, will not bring you life. It'll bring you death. And we just proved that through everything we just showed you. But in verse 11, this is the verdict that she says to her very daughter, that is identified as the lamb that was slain, the cornerstone rejected, before the foundation of the world, was the Spirit of her covenant. And it is this daughter that we're identifying. And this is what she says to her. It says, see what this godly sorrow has produced in you? What earnestness, what eagerness to clear yourselves? What indignation, what alarm, what longing, what concern, what readiness to see justice done. At every point, you have proved yourself to be innocent in this matter. She is saying, I allowed this to go forth so that at the very end you could understand that you were not guilty of what they're saying you're guilty of, which is to say that you did not uphold your covenant. You have come back to me. You have proven that you are innocent in this matter. And verse 12, so even though I wrote to you, it was neither on account of the one who did the wrong, that wasn't what it was about, nor on account of the injured party, that wasn't what it was about, but rather that before God you could see for yourself how devoted to us you are. You see? She's saying, stand up, pick your head up. You see how devoted you are to us, to the justice, to the truth of your covenant. You have come back to me. And I let it all play out so that you could see your own innocence in the whole thing. And so, for me, that took me to the verse that we find in Revelations. I couldn't help but think of this. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet. That's Israel's feet, and specifically the daughters. that they rejected in covenant, and to know that I have loved thee. She says, I didn't forget about you. They forgot about you, but I never forgot about you. She says, you're cut from me. How could I forget about you? And I knew you were cut from me. I was just waiting for you to verify that for yourselves. So there was something else I wanted to say here right quick. That was found in Revelation 3:9. And that is the verdict that she hands down, the Ancient of Days hands down. And it is because she is crying out for justice. She does want the truth restored back in the world. And so we talked about it a little bit in the last video. But Jeremiah 31:4, it says, I will build you up again. Who's doing the building? Zerubbabel. In Zechariah 4, we see that. Which means foreigner in Babylon. So again, it is identified as Israel, the daughters. And you, virgin Israel, will be rebuilt. Again, you will take up your timbrels and go out to dance with the joyful. Again, you will plant vineyards on the hills of Samaria. So this is actually the government of God being restored. That's what you come to understand when we got understanding what the house and the forest of Lebanon was. And it was where the congregation, they're identified as a congregation of women in Psalm 68, met and would receive the word of Mother God from above. And we also get the allegory of them as the stones of fire that walked up and down these gateways. And they're actually identified as portals when you look the actual words up. In Greek, it says gateway, portal. Does so. And so, but there, we also see this image in Daniel where it has a lion, like a lion, and it had wings, but then the wings get cut off. And that image is then forced to stand and talk like a man. Well, the wings were allegorical to his spiritual power that got cut off, and that was the daughters of Zion that came and went on this stairway that Jacob saw in his dream, and it was the camp of Mahanaim, the camp of God, which is seen with the Shulamite. And that's what this is all taking us to in our understanding now. Did I do everything I needed to in this video? So that's a quick recap of what I've got so far. I don't got a whole lot more to go through, I don't think. But there will be a part 6, just to wrap up and to look a bit more, to really go through thoroughly what the Key of David is, how we identified it. And to look at the house in the forest of Lebanon. We're going to look at the king of Tyre, how we identified who that was. And, I don't know, maybe a few odds and ends there. So, thanks for watching. I hope y'all have a really nice day. I hope the Lord blesses you with an abundance of truth. And thanks for watching.